We are live for our 3 o'clock live stream. I'm going to give a minute just to let anybody join in and let you enjoy this redwood here behind me with a nice burn scar going right through it. Thank you to anybody joining right off the bat. And if you are already here, can you go ahead and leave a like or comment? Let me know that you're here, that you can hear, you can see okay. Everything's looking good on your end. Everything's looking good on my end. So hopefully you can see me, hopefully you can hear me. Today we're going to be talking about names, a little bit about taxonomy, and essentially what goes into a scientific name, and why it's helpful to know about them. So again, just going to give a couple minutes for people to join. I'll flip this around and give you guys some good views of the beautiful redwood forest. I'm out at Prairie Creek Redwood State Park today. See, we've got people coming in. Excellent, excellent. If you guys can see and hear okay, leave me a like or a comment. Let me know. You can see and hear okay. All right. So we've got some comments coming in. All right, excellent. All right, hello, 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 awesome. Are those little birdhouses? Are you talking about, we've got the campfire center right over here. So these buildings might look pretty small, but these are full-size buildings. These are all for the campfire center, projector booth, and all that kind of stuff over there, if that's what you were seeing. If you're talking about the trees, well, yes, birds love to live in the trees. Those could be birdhouses. Thanks for your question, Robin. All right. Looks like we can see, looks like we can hear. Looks like we've got some people tuned in, so excellent. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in today. My name is Kyle. I'm a park interpreter specialist for California State Parks, and today I'm out at Prairie Creek Redwoods State Park. This is a part of Redwood State National Park up on the north coast of California, just south of the Oregon border. What I'm going to be talking about today, I mentioned just a moment ago, but for those of you guys just joining in, I'm going to be talking about names. What's in a name, essentially. So frequently what interpreters do is they kind of bridge this gap between the kind of dense scientific knowledge and make it understandable and accessible for people. And a big part of the science that really scares people is scientific names, these big, long, two-part Latin-based names. But what I want to talk about today is essentially why those are helpful for scientists, why it's worthwhile to know scientific names for maybe some of your favorite things, and some of the things they cue us in for. Why do we even have these big, long scientific names when we've got so much fun common names for things? So we'll be talking about that. I do want to acknowledge that so many of you guys are doing your part to stay at home and shelter in place during COVID-19. We really appreciate you doing that. We are doing these live streams every day to support our mission as California State Parks to provide for the health, the education, and the inspiration of the public. Trying to give you a little bit of the outdoor spaces in your home and provide for your health. We're trying to give you a little bit of infotainment here, give you a little preview into these outside spaces, and educate you while entertaining you, and then inspire you to come back to these places when you are able to, and maybe see some new places, maybe learn some new things, and maybe see these places in a different light. So thank you guys so much for joining. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. So I've got a beautiful redwood behind me, and I'm going to use this kind of as our example for talking about our first scientific name. So taxonomy, right, is essentially the study of classifying organisms and figuring out how they're related to each other. So a lot of times scientists will break this down to kind of a DNA level and see how certain things have co-evolved together or led to other organisms. One of my favorite ways to look at this is to see how dinosaurs essentially are related to modern organisms. So if you find something you like, maybe you really like mountain lions, or maybe you really like chickens, it's really interesting to check out their taxonomic tree, basically their family history, what they're related to, how closely they're related to things, and where their ancestors essentially came from. So, you know, they always say chickens came from velociraptors and things like that. It's really interesting to see the taxonomic tree, basically all of these branches like a family tree of how these things are related. And taxonomy is basically grouped into different hierarchy levels. So you have at the very top, and I'm going to check my notes to make sure that I'm saying this right, because this is something that I've struggled with a little bit in my education. So kingdom is the highest categorization. There's basically only 3 kingdoms that all living things fall under. plants, animals, and protists, basically gooey things. So all things are categorized basically in these three grand categories in the kingdom. After kingdom, you get down to division, or that would be phylum next, class, order, family, genus, species. And basically what it does is every time you go down, you're getting more and more specific. So, and then the final name that you see, the scientific name, is the two most specific things. It's the genus and the species of an organism. So a genus is a group of organisms, and we frequently use genuses to refer to things. So when we're talking about dragonflies, or talking about kind of these organisms that we use common names for, most of the time what we're referring to is a genus rather than a particular species. So when we say, oh, that's a mayfly, there are so many different species of mayfly, but we just call them mayfly because those differences, for most people, don't really matter that much. But what's really cool about these scientific names, genus, species, is that they tell us a lot, or can tell us a lot, not always, but tell us a lot about the organism. So for instance, the name for a redwood, the scientific name, these are coast redwoods that we have here. Their scientific name is Sequoia sempervirens, and that means the ever-living evergreen. And that tells us about this organism is that they're incredibly resilient, and they are evergreens. So they always have green leaves year-round. They're conifers, they have needles, they don't drop those. And they have so many different defense mechanisms to survive, from tannic acid to repel insects and disease, to their resistance of fire, being able to regrow over that thing. These are incredibly resistant trees, incredibly resilient. And while they don't live forever, they are resilient to dying. A Sequoia sempervirens. And that scientific name cues us into some things about this organism. Now, another thing we see, well, I'm still talking about redwood trees. Something else that I think is really interesting about this is I've talked about this in one of my live streams before as well, is that we have three existing species, essentially, of redwood tree. You have the coast redwood, you have the giant sequoia, and you have the dawn redwood. And while we don't have dawn redwoods very commonly out here, they're kind of based out of China, you have probably seen giant sequoias before in Sequoia Park. And you'll notice that they look fairly different than redwoods, but they are all, or coast redwoods at least, but they all are called redwoods. And what I think is really interesting is each of these scientific names. So this is a Sequoia sempervirens. Giant sequoias are Sequoia dendron giganticum. And what's interesting to note here is that that genus, that first part of the name, is different for those two organisms. And what that means is that these organisms are actually not that closely related. Now, they are redwood trees. They fall under this blanket of redwood trees. And if you go back in their taxonomic history, what you find out is that there were other sequoia genus, different species than Sequoia sempervirens, and there was also different Sequoia dendron species. So Sequoia dendron being the genus. There was different species within that. Now, in current times, the still existing species are only, there's only one representative from each of those genuses. So the only surviving sequoia species is Sequoia sempervirens, and the only surviving Sequoia dendron species is Sequoia dendron giganticum. I know this is a whole lot of Latin, a whole lot of big words coming at you, but what I'm trying to illustrate here is that there was a huge variability historically of trees that could be considered redwoods. And throughout time, certain representatives from those were not able to survive, and they eventually went extinct. So the redwood trees that we see today, Sequoia sempervirens, Sequoia dendron giganticum, are kind of this elite of their genus that were able to survive throughout history, throughout the Jurassic period, throughout whatever extinction wiped out the dinosaurs. These species prevailed through all of that. They were kind of the strongest of their genus. And if you look into organisms, you'll find that out about a lot of them, that there are so many relatives that they've had historically that have gone extinct, just further proving how resilient and how incredibly adapted some of these organisms are. So I am going to keep this relatively short today. I know it's kind of a dense topic, but there is one more organism I wanted to talk about with a scientific name. Well, a couple more examples as to how these scientific names can really cue us into things about these organisms. So I'm going to flip the camera here, and something we see very commonly in the redwood forests are this kind of clover-looking stuff on the ground. All of these kind of clover-looking things. So this is Redwood sorrel. This is also, its scientific name is Oxalis oregana. And what's really cool about this, the oxalis part is referring to oxalic acid in these plants. And if you were to taste one of these, which they are edible, but we won't, and if you do eat too many, they can make you sick. But if you were to taste one, they have kind of an acidy flavor. And that comes from that, or kind of a sour flavor, I should say. And that comes from that oxalic acid. And just its scientific name, Oxalis oregana, kind of cues us in to this organism. Now, in taxonomy, you also have these really broad categories. Phylum is one of the kind of easiest places to learn about organisms in a really broad and general way. One phylum that we're very probably familiar with is Arthropoda, or arthropods. And this is basically all insects and buggy things. What their name means is jointed appendages, basically. So these things have an exoskeleton and have jointed appendages so they can move arms and legs. Arthropoda. And, you know, that scientific name is cueing us into, that's how you identify these things. That Latin-based complicated science name is saying exactly what the thing is. So while scientific names might seem, well, another one of my favorites is cephalopods. Now, cephalopods are things like squid, like octopus, and what that translates to is head foot, cephalopod. And if you look at an octopus, a whole ton of feet, a cephalopod, a head foot. It's so incredibly kind of entertaining just to find out how these organisms got their names and how these scientific names describe things about the organisms. So if you do have any questions about this, of course, as always, okay, just now seeing questions. Sorry, I did not scroll down. Excellent. So I will check those out. But I do want to encourage you guys, and go ahead and pop this up in the comments if you already know. But think about, find one of your favorite organisms, whatever it might be, and do a little bit of taxonomic diving. And I promise you, it won't be as scary as it seems. See if you can find out its scientific name, what it means. Sometimes it can be incredibly entertaining. And see some of its relatives. One of my favorites is find out, where do house cats come from? Where do dogs come from? Domestic dogs. How closely related are they to their wild ancestors and things like that? It's really incredible. As soon as you start doing a little bit of research, I personally just get really hooked into it. I think taxonomy is so interesting, and I never expected that of myself. So I really encourage you guys, do just a little bit of research, just do a little bit of digging, find out the scientific name, and see if you can't figure out what it means. All right, I'm going to start checking out these comments. I didn't realize my thing wasn't scrolling automatically. Eyes and ears working, excellent. People-sized houses. Okay, that was what you're looking at, Robin. I love it. Everything does look small in a redwood forest when you have hundreds of feet tall trees. Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Hello, Braid. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, you guys, I really appreciate it. Sequoia dendron. That is a great question. I will. Michelle asked, "What does dendron mean?" The part of Sequoia dendron for the Sequoia dendron giganticum, the giant sequoias. Michelle, that is a great question. You can kind of assume giganticum, the second part of giant sequoia, means giant. But what's the difference between sequoia as a genus and Sequoia dendron? That's a great question. I'll do a little bit of research and see if I can get back to you. Are there misleading scientific names like there are misleading common names? Yes, there are, Laura. That's a great question. Every once in a while, you have a misnomer. So something like a scientist thought a certain thing about something and made the scientific name based around this misconceived thing. That does happen every once in a while, and that can be just as entertaining to find out. Copepods, for instance. Copepods are these microscopic organisms. They're plankton. Plankton also being a Greek word, meaning drifter or wanderer, that they drift through the water. They can't swim against the current. Another example of how these kind of Latin-based scientific words can cue us into things. What does this mean? And so copepod means oar foot. And a copepod doesn't really use their feet to paddle or swim, but they look like they have these big, long oar feet, and those are actually their antennae. So that's a great example of how these things can get misnamed. Scientific names, still interesting. Oh, Robin, thank you. So the dendron part of sequoia dendron is Greek for tree. Thank you for figuring that out for me. Very lemony, the redwood sorrel. Yes. Yes, Braid. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes. So it does have a kind of sour taste to the redwood sorrel. Excuse me, the Oxalis oregana. But you do want to be careful about if you do decide to taste it. Again, you want to make sure that you're leaving enough for animals. You don't want to eat too much because it can kind of upset your stomach. And also be considerate of it being near the trails. It's possible that a dog peed on it or a person stepped on it. Not always best to taste it, even if it is interesting to know about. Oh, I love that. Heather said she grew up in the coast redwoods and lived by giant sequoias. She took a class and they made a Venn diagram to kind of compare the two species and see how they were alike and how they were different, and it was really helpful for learning more about them. That's a great idea. I love that. Thanks for sharing, Heather. It is interesting, Michelle, that you have one that is sequoia dendron and one that is just sequoia. And I should have the scientific genus for Dawn redwood handy as well. Unfortunately, I don't. But it is also different than those other two genuses. So you have 3 different genuses of redwood tree that are all the only extant, the only existing representatives from each genus. I see. Hi, I'm Oliver, and I'm 5. Oliver, I am so sorry about this talk. This is not the most entertaining for a 5-year-old. Go back and watch the plankton one or some other one that's a lot more fun. I'm so sorry. I came out a 5-year-old with taxonomy. Does Kyle have an educational Instagram? Just the North Coast Redwoods page. You can check it out. Oliver, 5 years old. Have you seen Bigfoot? Oh, great question, Oliver. I have not personally seen Bigfoot, but I have seen some pretty convincing photographs, I will say. You'll have to come and look for yourself. See if you can find him. The potato bird, the common name for the potato bird. It's adorable scientific name. Thank you, Robin, for asking. The common name for the speckled potato bird, as I like to call it, is the marbled murrelet. I'm not sure of its scientific name off the top of my head, but yes, what I refer to as the speckled potato bird is a marbled murrelet. I'd be really interested to learn more about its scientific name and maybe where that came from as well. Great question, Robin. And a great question, Michelle, saying, if dendron means tree, why isn't every tree called dendron of some sort? That's a great question. Oh, thank you. Metasequoia. Okay. Thank you very much for looking into that. So you have metasequoia, sequoia dendron, and just sequoia. Very interesting. So again, just wrapping up here, really encourage you guys to do a little bit of research on your own. Find your favorite organism. See how it's related to things. Find out what its scientific name. See if you can figure out where that came from. It is tons of fun. It can be hilarious. And as strange as it seems, looking up lengthy scientific names, genus, species, can be incredibly entertaining. And researching things this way, too, can simplify some of the hard work. So if you learn about the phylums, these kind of broad categories, that can tell you a lot about the organisms that are filed underneath them. And you can kind of learn some good general guidelines for anything that might be found underneath there, like the arthropoda. Anything with an exoskeleton with jointed appendages. Great. And now I can sound really, really smart to all of my friends, see any bug and go, ah, interesting. An arthropoda. Mm-hmm. Yes. And you sound really smart. So check it out. See if you can't sound really smart. All right, I'm seeing some people doing some research. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. But again, thank you guys all so much for tuning in for this. I really appreciate you being here. And this was just a really fun topic for me to talk about. I forgot how much I loved it. I did a little bit more research on something and just started falling down the taxonomic rabbit hole. And I thought, why don't I talk about this? So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Maybe share in the comments after you do a little bit of research what these names mean to you, what names might mean to you, and some of those organisms that maybe you searched up and found some really cool, really interesting facts about. We're doing these live streams every day at 3 o'clock, so be sure to tune in. If you want to hear from different parks, different people, we're always doing these live streams every single day. Tomorrow, Skip is going to be doing his very first solo live stream. So if you guys have been keeping up with our live streams, you've seen Skip talk on a couple of different people's live streams. He's been featured on Griff's on Fridays and Sundays quite a bit. He is going to be taking over the Sunday slot, so he will be doing 3 o'clock live streams every single Sunday talking about Yurok culture. It's going to be really a treat, so I really encourage you guys, check it out tomorrow at 3 o'clock. He'll be here at Prairie Creek talking about culture, so it's going to be really fascinating. I encourage you guys all to tune in. Thank you all again so much for tuning in. I see these thank yous. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means a lot that you guys are on the other side of this, liking it, and we really appreciate your continued support in all of these live streams. Well, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you again so much for tuning in. Let me know more about what you find out in the comments, and I will be getting back to you. And as always, if you have any questions, just post them down in the comments, and I'll come back around and answer them if I didn't get to them. Thank you guys again. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.